Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiaoqun and I'm moderating the 8th YouTube session of the 7th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. Now, we'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in the session. And you can find out more about our work at the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, today, we have a very special guest for our live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A section, the multi-genre, multi-medium author, Alex Segura.
Hello, thanks so much for
Hey,
having me.
Alex.
Hi.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So, for you readers, for you audience out there who may not know Alex so well, Alex not only writes novels and comics, but also podcasts across several genres. His work includes the twice Anthony Award nominated Pete Fernandez Mystery series, the Black Ghost comic series, various Archie comics, including the critically acclaimed Archie Meets Kiss story arc, which also has zombies in it, and
Yes.
the and the Little Leads podcast. His latest novel, which was released by Disney Books just last month, is actually set in the Star Wars universe and is titled Poe Dameron Freefall. And aside from writing, Alex is also the co-president of Archie Comics. Now, he has generously donated 4 super exclusive Star Wars and Archie's book and comic bundles to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, these bundles are only for US and Canada-based donors. But for you lucky North Americans, each bundle includes one signed and personalized first edition hardcover of Poe Dameron Freefall, which is part of the Star Wars canon, by the way, one signed and personalized first volume of the Archie's one-shot comic series, which contains the first 5 issues of the series. Now, Alex, I believe you have a copy of Poe Dameron to show.
I do. Yes. Look at this a beautiful Star Wars novel that will be part of your
Yeah,
bundle if you grab
donate.
one. So yes,
Yeah,
donate.
yes.
And the
So,
cover is by Phil Noto, who is a comic book artist, very renowned comic book artist and friend of mine. So he did a fantastic job.
yeah, looks great. So, whether you guys, you're an enthusiastic Star Wars fan, a longtime Archie's fan, or, you're coming to Alex's work for the first time, this bundle is a great way to get more reading goodness to pass your time during the current pandemic, while also donating to support the cause to end violence against women and girls. Now, one of these bundles has already been snatched up thanks to one of our long-term supporters, Elizabeth Semq. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. That
Thank
means,
you.
yeah, so that means that there are only 3 of these exclusive goodies left from Alex. So if you want to get to know Poe Dameron's backstory, or Archie and the Riverdale gang, or both, donate now to snag a bundle before they're all gone. So far, we've raised $2,230 towards our $5,000 goal, which unfortunately is our slowest fundraiser yet. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on October 18th. All funds will go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now, if you're watching this session on YouTube, you will be able to ask Alex questions live. So just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Alex to answer. Now, we usually have a reading from our author at this point, but poor Alex has had a dental procedure done recently and his mouth is still a bit sore. So we are just
Yeah.
gonna jump straight into the questions and answers, Alex. All
Yeah, I
right?
apologize. It's just had my wisdom teeth out on Monday, and talking is not my favorite thing right now. But I'm here, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being with us, despite still being in pain. So
Yeah.
I am going to give you the floor, Alex.
All right.
And there we go. So into the questions. Now, I mentioned earlier that you write across multiple genres and mediums. And I would like to note that you have come up with quite a number of interesting female characters in your writing. For
Uh huh.
example, there's reporter Lara Dominguez, who is the protagonist of The Black Ghost, the
Mm-hmm.
various women in the PETE Fernandez mystery series, most notably Pete's ex-fiancée, Emily Sprague Blanco, his mother, Graciela Fernandez, who I thought you did really well, and his
Thanks.
fellow journalist, Kathy Bentley, who, bit of a spoiler alert here, eventually becomes Pete's investigative partner. And
Right.
of course, you have had to tackle world-famous comic book characters like Betty, Veronica, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch in your Archie comics.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, who or what are your inspirations for the female characters that you have created or written about?
I wish I had like a famous celebrity answer, but the truth is it's people around me, my friends, my wife, my family, really strong, empowered, and vocal women that, maybe don't fit the cliche of some women in fiction, but are also have agency and, have enough gravity where the story gets pulled in their direction. As much as I love writing Pete, who's the star of the Pete Fernandez mysteries, I find Kathy to be almost, if not more compelling because, whenever she's on the screen or on the page, the camera instantly moves to her and she is the center of the story because she doesn't fit the mold of, the sidekick or the, funny partner. She's probably as smart and as capable as Pete, if not more so. And, I'm really interested in showing characters with flaws and being honest about how I reflect the world, and part of the benefit of crime fiction is, or the best crime fiction for me reflects the world in a clear way. So with something like The Black Ghost, you have this woman who's a very capable journalist in Lara Dominguez, but she also has her demons. Like she's an alcoholic. She's dealing with some form of PTSD. Her brother was murdered in Miami before she moved to a new city. And we see her overcome these problems, not in a I'm better now I'm a superhero way, but in a much more organic and human way, where while she may have achieved these goals, she still has to kind of deal with her own inner demons. As for Graciela, that's Pete's mom, and when I wrote my first Pete novel, Silent City, it was very focused on Pete and his relationship with his father, who was a homicide detective in Miami and died suddenly, and then Pete kind of picks up the mantle and becomes a PI. But I knew at some point I had to tell the story about Pete's mom. I just didn't feel like I was ready yet. And so when I was thinking about what to write for Miami Midnight, which I knew was going to be the last book in the series, I was reminded about this thread, and I really didn't want it to be just one of those, there's so many mystery novels where the story opens up with a dead woman and you don't really learn about this woman. She's kind of a plot device. And I really didn't want that. I wanted readers to, through flashback, get to know this woman and then have those flashbacks tie into the present in a meaningful way. I wanted the readers to see her story. And though it was a tragic story in the end, you kind of see the parallels between Pete and his mom and her journey and his journey, because they're both alcoholics. And, addiction is a big theme in a lot of my work. I think it's a battle that not everyone wins, and it's kind of a silent struggle that a lot of people don't share. So I think that's really a part of it too.
Yeah, and we'll come back to Graciela in a second, but one of our audience members, Misty, hi Misty, she's one of our longtime supporters as well. So in relationship, yeah, FYI, I had all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed in high school. I suggest room temperature pasta and soft pretzels.
I appreciate that. You should have seen me a couple days ago. So this is actually, I'm almost back to my normal appearance in terms of my cheeks, and I'm grateful for a beard and ice cream and mashed potatoes and soft foods. But yeah, it's dental work is never fun at any age. But thank you, Misty.
True. Now, okay, coming back to the question. So, whether it's mystery, crime thrillers, or science fiction and fantasy, or comics, every genre has its particular range of female stereotypes and tropes. And I can see some of the stereotypes and tropes coming up in your work, but I see that you manage to, not quite conform to them. So, how do you challenge stereotypes and subvert tropes to create female characters with complexity and agency when dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls, kind of like what you did with Graciela.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things with any trope is, as a writer, you have to analyze it and see, is this a trope I want to, partake in, and does it work well, or is it something that needs to be flipped? I mean, one of the key tropes of the private eye genre is that the private eye needs to be a drunk, but a drunk is very different from an alcoholic. An alcoholic is someone who's
Mm.
is probably seeking some kind of therapy or help. And I wanted to flip that. I didn't believe that someone could sit at the bar and have, 3 martinis and then hop in the car and save the day. A lot of, and so there's also very, negative tropes that deal with women that are often in books written by men. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school. I think it's just the reality.
Yeah.
Woman gets kidnapped in the opening scene. It's a violent attack, and then you never see the character again. Or serial killer novels where it's just a series of brutal scenes. And I kind of tackle those in each of my novels in different ways. And in Silent City, my first novel, the book opens up with you'll know who she is later, with a woman getting kidnapped. And at first you're reading it and you're like, okay, this is your typical PI novel. But later on, she actually becomes a key part of not only that book. She gets rescued, but she also then, uses her own agency to carve out her own path. And then she comes back into the narrative as her own independent person. And that's Kathy. She starts off as the missing girl, but then becomes such an integral part of the series. And that's not by accident. It wasn't just like, oh, how can I tweak this? I purposely wanted to not utilize a character as just a throwaway. Like, I wanted her to be a fully 3-dimensional person. And you can see that, of course, with Graciela. But in the second book, Down the Darkest Street, it's a serial killer novel, but it's also a novel about, marginalized women being preyed upon, and how often, these attacks are fallen through the cracks because it's not your typical attention getting kind of victim, and I think there's a line in the book where, Pete and Kathy are going through the list of the victims, and Kathy points out, the reason nobody is following up on this case is because the victims are, marginalized women. They're not like your typical, like, blonde, blue-eyed woman. And it was also important to show each of the victims' stories. And at the end, and I don't mean to spoil the book, you'll enjoy the drama of it anyway. At the end, the final victim gets away, not because Pete finds her, but because she figures it out and escapes, and then manages to push the narrative. So it's really important to me to spend as much time fleshing out female characters as much as I do male characters. And a lot of it comes from spending time with really strong, empowered women, and taking the time to really see, just be attentive. I think writers talk a lot about paying attention to things and dialogue and things like that, but there's so much more to character. It's how you react to certain situations, how you stand up for yourself. And I think there's so much to be admired. Women tolerate so much, and I think that's part of what I want to reflect in my characters, just make them feel realistic and also not secondary to Pete. The big challenge, in the fiction I read and the fiction I write, I don't want the main male character to be the son, where everyone else just kind of rotates around him, and once they're off screen, they don't matter. Like, he's part of a cast, and the cast is almost as important as he is. And I want to reflect that in each of the characters and give them each their own mini arc, and not just, it's not a video game where you walk into a room and someone says, here's the key, and then that's it. And then that character, you never hear from them again. It's not, for me, it all starts with character, for me, is my point. And it all starts with realistic personality traits and realistic, problems, realistic issues. And I think being true to that means that sometimes people won't like your characters, and that's fine. Pete, for example, is not for everyone. I've heard people say, oh, he's too stubborn, or why does he keep drinking? Or, why does he do that? He's so impetuous. Yeah, people are like that. Not everyone is like, a Jack Reacher type, where you're kind of this strong, silent Avenger and you just show up and save the day. Like, and that's fine. I think Reacher's great. I think those books are fantastic, but it's not, I'm more interested in something else. And so that's my point.
Yeah, so I mean, I do have to admit, I felt like slapping Pete a couple of times, like,
Yeah,
get it together, dude, but
yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
And,
His journey is a bumpy one. So
yeah, and we will be speaking a bit about likable and unlikable characters. But before
okay.
that, I would like to ask you, because you write in both established story verses as well as one of your own creation, do you find it easier to break female stereotypes when you write your own characters versus when writing stories set in established story verses like Star Wars and Archie? Or are there different challenges for each situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think each situation is so different. In my own world, I have final authority on what happens to these characters. I can determine how they interact with each other. It's really 100% up to me. Obviously, there's an editor and an agent and a publisher, and they all vet it. But by the time it gets to them, it's pretty
Mm,
close to final in terms of my vision. Whereas with something like Archie or Star Wars, you're playing in a sandbox. You're given parameters, and you can use this character, or this is kind of the beats we want you to hit. But I don't think that's so limiting that you sacrifice things like meaningful or strong female characters. Poe Dameron Freefall is as much Zori Bliss's origin story as it is Poe's. I mean, we see her for 10 minutes in Rise of Skywalker, and she's by far the most compelling new character aside from maybe Babu Frick. Like, she pulls you in and you just want to know more about this character. And so I was so honored to be able to tell that story and to tell the story of a young woman who is very driven and focused and unwilling to compromise if it means in her goals not being met. And that's kind of, you see the trajectory of Poe and Zori throughout the book. And at the end, they crash together. I'm not spoiling anything, from watching the movie that they have a falling out. Um,
mm.
but that was really fun. And it was really great to write this empowered teenage character and know that, it fit into the canon.
Oh, yeah, that's always great. Finding out more about like a character that you see briefly on screen and you're like, oh, I want to know more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay, let's transitioning to comics. I mean, they are a very different medium from novels in that obviously they combine illustration and writing in equal importance, and they are really a team effort between the writer or writers and the illustrators. So,
Mhm.
what are the particular challenges that you have encountered in writing complex and well-rounded female characters in comic books?
Particular challenges. I think it's really, I wouldn't say it's a challenge per se. I think the big thing you want to do is make sure your creative team is on the same page as you are.
Mm,
With
mm,
something like The Black Ghost, my co-writer Monica Gallagher and I had worked together on Lethal Lit, and we wanted to really tap into some similar things. We wanted to have a really strong female lead. We wanted to have a really entertaining and engaging supporting cast, and we wanted to show her as not only this invincible super type or cliche, but also this kind of character that has to overcome and become, by the end of the story, be somewhere else in her journey. And that's important. And I think that's for me, the best fiction pushes characters forward. And if your character is the same on page 300 as they are on page 1, something's gone wrong. Or it's just like an episode of Law and Order, which is fine. There's a time for that, but
mm,
I'm much more intrigued by character and character stories. With something like the Archies, which is not my IP.
mm,
For me, when writing Betty and Veronica, it's more about writing stories that don't just revolve around Archie, but revolve around their friendship. So
mm,
in the Archies, there is a moment where it's a subplot where Betty catches Veronica and Archie together, but then they have a really tender moment after that, and Betty's like, and they have a moment where like, our friendship is much more important than this guy, and we need to be mindful of that.
mm,
It's always tiring when they're just defined by their male relationships. When actually the most interesting story is, how do these two women manage to remain friends and still have, both have mixed and complicated feelings for this guy? And so that's interesting. There's some really fertile ground to talk about there. And that's something we touch on in the Archies, but also showcasing them as individual musicians, as different
mm,
personalities. I think in the classic Archie drawings, it's, if you don't look at the colors, they are drawn very similarly. It's just their hairstyles are different. So it's really, how
mm.
do you define them so they feel like two different people that are best friends, as opposed to two people who are the same chasing Archie,
Yeah, I mean that's the Archie, Betty, and Veronica are definitely one of the longest running, most complex love triangles ever, probably.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Well, so as we can see from the hashtag men writing women, many male authors can't seem to write female characters well. Even best-selling male authors like sci-fi writer Brandon Sanderson have talked about how they initially found it difficult to write women well, and that it took a lot of work to finally write great female characters. So, as a male author yourself, did you find it difficult to write women when you first started writing?
I wouldn't say I found it difficult, but I should note that that doesn't mean it was easy. I think
Mm,
I'm a really firm believer in showing characters with their flaws and doing research and reading outside. I read a lot of female writers. I think I probably read more
mm,
female writers than male writers. And you kind of get a sense for how they flesh out their characters and how they, write female characters and how they write male characters, and you learn through that organically. But also, I'm a firm believer in beta readers, in having a
mm,
diverse pool of people that read your stuff before it goes out. And while I do think there are certain people that can speak to certain stories, I'm probably more qualified to write about a Cuban American male PI than somebody else is. I think
mm.
you can also speak outside of your experience if you do the research. Make sure that you speak to the right people and that they can give you feedback, and that that's not a unilateral thing.
Mm,
It's impossible. It's really hard to write outside of your comfort zone and experiences and claim. I think the issue that we see a lot of times is that the work claims authenticity or claims to be definitive. And
mm,
I think that's the challenge when someone writes outside of their experience or outside of their background, and it claims to be definitive or authentic. And you see that sometimes in publishing, and I think deservedly so. People should be called out, and
mm.
if you are doing that outside of your own experience, you need to be mindful of how you present that. But to the
Yeah.
question of
Mm,
writing female characters, I think it's also having conversations with people. And I always, my wife is my best beta reader, and she
mm,
will say, a woman wouldn't do that. Like, why, she's just very honest. And I think the best part about, to get good beta readers, you need people that are not going to just say, this is great, I'm so proud of you, I'm so happy you wrote a novel. That's what your mom is for. That's what like some people are for, but they're not your beta readers. Your beta readers are
mm,
people who aren't just going to read your book, but are also readers of fiction and readers of outside of just the norm.
mm,
I have a friend in California, and she's read pretty much most of my novels, and we're very different. She's just completely different than I am, and we've experienced different things in life. So when I send her the book to read, I know I'm going to get the eye of someone who's experienced different things, and that can add texture and nuance and thoughtfulness to things that I maybe didn't consider, not because I was trying to be crude or trying to be dismissive. It's just not in my sphere of experience. And having people, and these aren't traditional sensitivity readers. That's a whole different thing. But beta
mm,
readers, I think, can give you a greater context and a greater sense of what you're trying to do, and really adds depth to your characters in ways you probably didn't imagine.
mm. So you mentioned that the problem lies in like sometimes authors when they write things they think it's like the definitive concept of whatever it is they're writing about. So do you think this is why many authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test? Despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men.
No, I don't think you have an excuse for not passing the Bechdel test at this point.
Mm,
People have known about it for so long. If you can't bring yourself to have your female characters engage with each other uh, about something that doesn't involve a man or a relationship, then I mean that's on you. I think it's on us to research, to read outside of our comfort zone, to read outside of authors like us. I mean, if I only read male authors, I would have a very narrow perspective of fiction, of crime fiction too. I think, there's a reason, there's a lot of unique takes on how to write a great crime novel. And I've been lucky to read great books by many different people. So,
oh, yeah. Okay, I think we have a question from the audience. Let me put it up.
okay.
So a question from Misty. How did you get selected to write a Star Wars book?
Great question, Misty. I think when I announced that Miami Midnight was going to be my fifth and final P. Fernandez novel, they reached out knowing that the book they were going to pitch was a Poe Dameron novel, and it's basically a crime novel in space. And I think they wanted a crime writer who had some experience, not only, writing crime novels, but also handling IP. So I've written Archie, I've written
Ah,
Lethal Lit, which is also a shared IP. So I think they got the sense, okay, he can write within. And this isn't me just presuming. It wasn't in the initial call, but I'm assuming that it was. He can write a crime novel. He has a background writing fantastical things, and he can also write licensed, established characters. So I think it was a combination of all of those things.
so you kind of were like, the perfect storm of like skills and qualifications.
I hope so. I mean, I hope people like the book. It seems like it's doing okay.
Oh, okay. We hope you'll do well too.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so your female characters, be they in your
Mhm.
novels or comic series, are determined, resourceful, and flawed women who aren't afraid to stand up for themselves. I mean, we can just look at Kathy for that, at the very
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
So, earlier we're talking about likability of characters. So, those traits that I just mentioned, like readers may perceive them as unlikable in a female character, but
Mhm.
tolerate or even admire them in a male character. So, there's that contradiction. So, have you ever felt pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters more likable or relatable to readers?
No, because with stuff like that, I tend to push back on it. I don't want my characters to feel just like cookie cutter examples of genre tropes. I didn't want Kathy to be the love interest right out of the gate, even though that undercurrent is always there from book one to the end. That at some point maybe they'll get together, maybe they won't. I wanted her to be her own independent character, and she does move around and do her own thing, and you know and I wanted her mainly to serve as a contrast to Pete, whereas Pete is impetuous and stubborn and problematic. She is sharp and focused and diligent, but also has her own baggage. I try not to think about the likable, unlikable thing, because I, as a reader, love unlikable characters. I find them really interesting. I find the complexities of unlikable characters much more entertaining than the steel jawed hero who has no problems and no background and just saves the day. And I think at the end of the day, for me, it's you write the book you want to read, you write the book that only you can write because it doesn't exist anymore, and that for me really drives me. And I wish maybe I should think about it more, but I really enjoy writing characters that aren't necessarily likable, and it's okay if you don't like them. I tell readers that all the time. As long as the story is entertaining and the characters are compelling, which is different than likable. Compelling means that they pull you in, they make you want to follow them. It doesn't mean you would hang out with them. You don't have to hang out with all these characters. But you may want to spend some time with them and see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I was like, there were times when I was like, Kathy, but I was like,
She
she
makes, I
always
mean, she
caught
makes
my
bad
eye.
decisions too. Yeah, she makes bad decisions. Pete makes bad decisions, but at the
Yeah,
end they kind of pull it together and save the day most of the time. But not without
true.
getting banged up on the way. It's
Oh,
problematic.
yes,
It's hard.
so many times.
Pete gets shot at, and who knows what happens. I mean, at the end of book 4, you think he's done. So
Mm.
it's really about showing that you can collect scars even if you're trying to do the right thing, and kind of channeling those ideas.
Mm. I mean, it's great that you're not thinking about it. But I mean, some female authors have talked about getting flack for not making a female character likable enough. So, as a
Mhm.
male author, particularly, do you encounter the same type of pushback?
I don't. I mean, if in terms of, which is a shame. I mean, my favorite female characters and my favorite female crime writers, all they write are messed up, complicated female characters. Like Megan Abbott, Kelly Braffett, Sarah Gran, Liz Little. Kelly
Mm,
Garrett, Amina
mm,
Akhtar. It's a whole thing. They're not just writing these basic, easy to identify characters who just form a cliche. Their characters are three-dimensional. They have problems. They have issues. They have goals, and that's what pulls me in as a consumer. And I think as a creator of content, you have to be a little selfish and write what you want to read.
True, true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, so you've written a wide range of male characters, ranging from, as you mentioned earlier, the recovering alcoholic journalist turned private investigator Pete Fernandez, to swashbuckling Star Wars rebel pilot Poe Dameron, and of course, beloved long-running comic characters like Archie Andrews, who is hardly the violent alpha male type. So, yeah, so let's talk about writing male and masculinity in genre fiction, whether it's in short stories, novels, or comic books. Now, do you think reframing how stories portray men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways genre writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yeah, I think it's important to show that it's a spectrum of, being, that not all men are this way, not all women are that way. Not every male character has to be this alpha, super violent or super physical or super intense character. Even Pete, who, he's a private eye and he's the hero of the piece, is not, at the beginning of the series, he doesn't know how to fight. He's never fired a gun. He's not, he learns those things as he goes, but he's never like a ninja. He doesn't, he's never like this martial arts expert until the very end. He's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to learn how to do it. So I think showing weakness, showing vulnerability, especially emotional vulnerability, like you see that throughout Pete's journey. You're in his head a lot, and you kind of see what he's going through and what he's dealing with. And some people say, "Oh, he's so emo," but I think that's important. I think we're all emo in those ways. I think you have this fictionalized ideal of what a male character should be, and strong and soft, short with words, and really quick to violence. And that's, A, it's uninteresting, and we see it all the time, and B, it's not very realistic. Not everyone is like that. And I think you can still have those kind of characters in your book, but then you also have to show the price that kind of persona pays. It's not, you want to paint a realistic picture. You want to make your characters three-dimensional, and I think part of that is showing the emotional weight. And one of the things with Pete in particular is showing that collection of baggage. Like, after 5 books of being, through the fire each time, that's when I was like, this is it. Like, I've put him through so much. I think I can't feasibly give him 3 or 4 more books where he's risking his life and getting bruised and battered without, kind of questioning the the realisticness of these books.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, Alex, you're so mean. Pete has been tortured so much. Seriously.
Yes, he's been through a lot. But so I gave him. He's got a break. He's on break.
Okay, well, that moves us very nicely to our next theme, which is basically violence in the mystery crime thriller genre. So obviously, in general, mystery crime thriller books usually involve some kind of violence, and this of course includes violence against women. And for example, as we mentioned earlier, the opening scene in your very first book, Silent City, involves Kathy being violently kidnapped at gunpoint.
Right.
And there are the usual stereotypes and tropes of fridging a female character to catalyze the journey of the male protagonist, which my kind of thing is what Kathy is, but obviously if you read the book, and as we mentioned earlier, totally isn't. Or sometimes authors, they just kind of throw in a rape scene or two just to show how bad a story world is. So how do you find a balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story but not showing it gratuitously? And I have to mention, seriously, your violence scenes are a bit out of the blue. Although very short, but kind of out of the blue. I don't know. Yeah, I'm like reading and suddenly I'm going like, what?
I mean, I'll take that as a compliment. I guess they surprise you. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, like, 1 minute someone's in a car, then suddenly there's a gunshot, and you're like, what? This guy's dead? What?
Well, there's a reason for that, and it kind of touches on what you said. I think, you want to portray violence realistically. You don't want to do it gratuitously. And I've heard different authors speak about this in different ways. The question is, well, how do you know if it's gratuitous? And it's gratuitous if there's some kind of pleasure being derived from the violence existing. And I never want a reader to read a scene of violence in my book and think like, wow, he had a great time writing this really intense, bloody, gratuitous scene. Because for me, violence is a means of forwarding the plot. It's an incident where people have conflict and they've chosen to express this conflict physically. It doesn't have to be the kind of thing where I have to detail every bone that's broken or like take any visceral pleasure in violence against anyone. So like you said, my scenes of violence are usually surprising because I think that's how violence is most of the time. When something violent happens, it's not something that you choreograph. It's very, you're taken by surprise. Somebody hits you, something comes out of nowhere and takes you by surprise. And they're also very brief. That's the thing. Like skirmishes or fights, everyone's like, I've read books where it's like they had like a 20-minute fight. Like it's like the end of some movies where they fight and fight and fight. And you're just like, this would be over. Like in the real world, fights don't last that long. Like somebody punches you, somebody punches back, and eventually it gets broken up or it ends. So I try to lean into as much realism as possible. I try to present the violence as clearly. I want it to be easy to follow, and I want it to be clear to the reader that it's a means to an end. I'm showing you the result of these actions, and this skirmish is that, but I'm not enjoying this moment. I'm just telling you what's happening. And you also, I believe this. I'm not alone in this, but I don't think it's a universal rule. But writing is about having a contract with your reader. It's about having this imaginary contract where you give them just enough information, and they take your words, extrapolate it, and create the mental picture. So I don't over-describe much. I don't over-describe Pete. I don't over-describe Kathy. I do describe settings and things like that. But in situations of violence, I just want to be clear, and I want it to be well choreographed, and I want it to be understand. I want the reader to understand what's going on, and I want them to also draw conclusions from the character's actions. And it's less about, I don't enjoy writing violence. I don't think, obviously I've never been in a fist fight, since maybe I was a kid. I'm not a violent person. I don't take pleasure in violence. I think it's just in terms of the genre, it's something that's part of the genre, but there's also ways to flip it so it doesn't feel like you're just doing it because you think it's funny or you think it's entertaining, because violence is not entertaining. It's not, let me rephrase that. Violence is entertaining. Obviously, as a culture, we find it entertaining, but there are ways to make it compelling narrative instead of gratuitous, punch 'em ups.
And jumping off a little bit from there, in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Well, I think one of the important things for me is always showing the aftermath of everything. The aftermath of violence, the aftermath of emotional beats. And I think so often you read books where a character is in a violent situation and 20 pages later they walk into the room and they're like, hey guys, what's going on? And that doesn't ring true to me, and it just doesn't paint a realistic picture. And I think you can add drama and you can add texture to these characters by showing that there's not an immediate recovery from these kind of things. And part of it with Pete, for example, is, he, by the end of the series, he doesn't have definitive PTSD, but he's definitely been through so much that he's scarred, and that has shaped his character in a different way. And it's also done the same for Kathy. I mean, she's been shot at. I think she's stabbed in the third book, and it's like, she survives these things and she's okay. And, there's scenes where she's in the hospital and there's recovery involved. And recovery is a big part, I think, of any journey for me in the writing process, just showing how these people pull themselves out from these situations. So I think it also adds realism to the violence by showing that there's an after effect. And if you just treat humans or people as these invincible beings who can just punch each other, and then it waters down, life. It waters down the importance of these characters as people.
Yeah, definitely. And okay, so in 2018, the Staunch Prize, which is an award set up to recognize crime and thriller novels without violence against women, was
Hmm.
launched to criticism from major crime novelists like Val McDermid, who believe that as long as there is violence against women in the world, it should be reflected in fiction. So, what is your take on the idea that crime thrillers can work without some form of violence against women? I mean, do you think it's feasible given some of the long-standing genre conventions and tropes?
I mean, I don't want to say you can never do that. I think you can obviously write a crime novel that doesn't feature violence against women because that's what the story is. Maybe the story involves like different kinds of characters. But in terms of this prize, which I think is saying authors should strive to not show this because this, by not showing it, you will affect the reality of the world. And I think personally, I find crime fiction works best when it's a lens on society, when it reflects what's
Mm,
happening in the world, when it gives you a realistic picture of what's going on. And so for me, when I read about the prize, I was like, this is different. I mean, it's not gonna, you're not showing the real world anymore. You're not showing an idealized version of the world, which is
mm,
fine, but I don't think that's really going to help people become aware of the problem. I think by showing it realistically, thoughtfully, showing the after effects and what goes on and what the solutions are, that's different. That's educational.
mm,
Whereas, not showing it at all by design is you're creating ignorance. Kind of, you're creating this reality that's not doesn't exist.
mm. So you do think that crime thriller stories can be used to address the issue of sexism, misogyny, sorry, misogyny and violence against women?
I mean, I think so.
Mm,
I think the best part about crime fiction is that it's not just the best crime fiction, I should say, is social commentary in the guise of fiction and action. The best characters, the best stories, they give you a picture of the world we live in. And I've learned so much about different places, different cultures, different conflicts through crime fiction just because I'm immersed in the story and I'm following these characters. And as I do that, I'm being educated about the world around them. And I think there's definitely the tools to do that in the genre.
great. And, parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. And, as a father of two, what do you
Yeah.
think parents can do to, one, help prevent violence against women and girls, and two, get boys involved in helping to do so?
Well, one of the things we do with our kids, definitely with my older son, who's 4, is we let him know immediately. We've tried to educate him about his agency and his body and his it's his space and respecting not only his space but other space. And we have very simple rules in the house. One of them is like safe bodies. You
Hmm,
be safe. You don't want anyone to do something to you. You don't do anything that would hurt somebody else. And it's a very basic way to describe it, obviously, because you're talking to a 4-year-old, but it's
hmm,
something that hopefully keeps that in his mind that, it is not okay to be
yeah.
physical with someone in that way. And it's something that I do think you need to educate children about early on. Like, I don't, every child is different. So I can only speak to my parenting and my children and how I parent them. Um,
Hmm,
but we definitely let them know that it's not okay, and this is why it's not okay. And obviously there's the whole golden rule idea, like you wouldn't want this to happen to you, and
hmm,
that's almost kind of playing off on selfishness, like, oh, I don't want this to happen to me, so I'm not going to do it. It should be more about being safe, to
hmm,
others, being safe to yourself. um, and I think that very basic idea, can grow and evolve as they get older, and you can educate them more about the world and what's going on. Yeah, that's the basic idea, I think.
oh, that sounds great.
I
So
hope.
final
I hope it works.
Yeah, well, we should hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, so final two questions from me.
Hmm.
You have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So,
Hmm.
okay, maybe this sounds a bit silly, but why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
I mean, I think it's hugely important. I think people tend to forget that it's still an issue. I think
Hmm,
education to me is the most important way to overcome the challenges we face. And I think education and awareness, are the tools we have to use to fight ignorance. And there's a lot of ignorance around violence against women. It's an everyday problem that women face. And there's
Mm,
degrees of violence, and there's also sexual harassment, and just, any range of issues that a woman faces every day in every way, like just walking to the train or walking to the store.
mm,
They're always at risk. And I have, from my female friends, from my wife, from my family, your guard is up in perpetuity. And,
mm,
that makes me sad. This sounds so basic. It makes me sad. It is sad. That is the way we live as a culture around the world. And I think creating awareness, letting people know that this problem persists and is not like swept under the rug or forgotten or ignored because there's other stuff going on, is such a huge challenge and so important. You guys are doing, amazing, important work. So it was a no-brainer to do this and help in whatever small way I can.
mm. So, I mean, what do you think authors in particular can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Well, I think the basic thing they can do is not show gratuitous violence against women. I think it's sometimes
Mm,
in fiction it becomes so easy to do that, or you see it so many times, especially in crime fiction. You see like serial killers, and it's all about the body count, or the opening scene is this very violent attack on a woman. Um, and if your characters don't have agency, if they're only there to be murdered, and you're not really helping. You're not helping. You're creating the problem, and it's almost this mentality that by seeing it on TV and seeing it portrayed on TV almost dismissively, it gives this sense that it's okay. It's not a direct validation, but by showing it in this kind of thoughtless way, you are validating it a little bit.
you're like normalizing it, right?
Right, exactly. That's a better word.
Mm, okay, well, I'm going to put myself back on. Thank you
Hello.
so much,
Thank
Alex.
you.
Hi.
My pleasure. Yeah,
That was
welcome back.
a great section. Okay, so before we go, I would just like to remind everyone that Alex has generously donated 4 super exclusive Star Wars and Archie book and comic bundles to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Do note that these bundles are only for US and Canada based donors, and they include one signed and personalized first edition hardcover of Poe Dameron Freefall, which is part of the Star Wars canon. And Alex has a copy for you to see, that lovely cover.
Yes.
And and also one signed and personalized first volume of the Archie's one-shot comic series, which contains the first 5 issues of the series. Now, our long-term supporter, Elizabeth Thank You, has already snatched up one of these exclusive bundles. Thanks again, Elizabeth. So there are only 3 left. So don't forget to donate now to snag one of these goodies before they're all gone. So far, we've raised $2,230 towards our $5,000 goal, which is our slowest fundraiser yet. So please give generously before the fundraiser ends on October 18th. Any amount will do. I mean, we even have small stuff going as a perk for, $5. And all these funds will go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And aside from Alex's stuff, there are also plenty more goodies available from authors like Kat Cho, Samantha Shannon, Sebastian de Castell, Melissa Caruso, Sarah Gailey, Kelly Garrett, Matt Gardiner, RJ Barker, Tamora Pierce, Alwyn Hamilton, Marsha Ryan Maresca, and more. And there will be new goodies released this upcoming Friday as well on our Rally Up webpage, which I am going to share right now. And there we go. So you can donate to get all these author goodies, including Alex's bundles, at http colon / bit.ly / r4p rally up 2020. Be aware of the caps, as is cap sensitive. And if you want to learn more about our Read for Pixels campaign, you can go to http colon / bit.ly / read for pixels. To find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it personally, do visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, so we're coming to the end of our session. Alex, do you have any announcements for us?
The next big news for me is my next novel, Secret Identity, is coming out from Flatiron Books, and it's a crime mystery story about a woman who moves from Miami to New York to work in comics in 1975, and she ghostwrites this character, and the character becomes a huge hit, and then she discovers that her co-writer, her collaborator, is murdered. So she's kind of pulled into the role of amateur PI. So it's an exploration of comic books at that time. I'm excited to write my first standalone and to get to work with Flatiron. So
It's like your two mediums, clashing worlds.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any upcoming fan meets or events in your area, maybe?
I do. I'm doing an event at Old Firehouse Books in Colorado, virtually, obviously, with E.K. Johnston, who is the author of Queen's Peril, another great Star Wars novel. So we'll be talking about each other's books, and that's the only one that comes to mind right now. But I'm sure there'll be more.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Alex. And thank you,
Thanks for having
everyone,
me.
for tuning in. It's our pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.